So before we went away to the United States of America last month, we as a church were doing a series called Church on the Move. And I very much want us to keep that whole picture in mind. That's where I want our mindset to be in. But over the next few weeks, we've got various different services, all age services, leading up to our 250th anniversary service in September. So there are different things going on. So I thought we would come out of the book of Acts for just now, and we will relaunch that mid-September. But for now, I wanted to do a 3-part series looking at something that fits with what we're looking at in the book of Acts. So the mindset is very much church on the move. What did we see? Well, as we started to look at the early church, we saw a group of people, a ragtag bunch of people who actually didn't have everything together, didn't understand everything, but they have been given an instruction to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. And we noticed 2 things. 1, they had a predictable pattern of life: prayer, Bible, fellowship, worship. But as well as having this predictability, it almost is as if this pattern acts as a tuning system to hear the voice of God, which enables them to do the second thing, which is to do the unpredictable, to respond to the voice of God and the wind of the Spirit. And as a result of these 2 things, we see the church moving, evolving, growing. One of the things I want to pick up within that is this idea of fellowship. We are told that the early church, they were devoted to one another. Big question, are we? Now, church commentators at the minute are looking at various statistics, and we know that the Church of Scotland as a denomination is on the decline. And what some church commentators are saying is that Pentecostal movements and some of the independent evangelical churches are on the rise. We're on the decline, they're on the rise. And I thought about this for a while when I was away, and I have to be honest and say this is my own personal experience, but within those other denominations, what I have found is that they have valued relationships highly. Within the Church of Scotland, what I've tended to find is that we have valued tradition highly. In fact, we valued tradition at the expense of relationships. And I see this as highly problematic. Relationship building within the church is of utmost importance. So for 3 weeks, we're going to challenge ourselves to consider the relationships that we have within our own church. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the relationship of David and Jonathan. Now, I felt also pushed to do this as a result of my experiences in the United States over this last month. Now, going there as a Scottish minister, you kind of know I've done this before. You're going on a winner because you're Scottish and you're a minister, 2 things that people like in American churches. So I knew that, and I've been received nicely before. But in this experience, perhaps it was because it was a smaller church, I don't know. But there was a real sense for me of acceptance, love, generosity, which led to a natural sense of service, in which myself and my family were really blessed by people round about us. It caused me to stop, to pause, to think about relationships, to think about my relationships back home, how I value them, how I look at them, what are my relationships within the church. And that combining with looking at Church on the Move, I felt convicted that this David and Jonathan connected series would be helpful for us as we move forward. There's the story of 2 men who fought against each other in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. On the 6th anniversary of that war, these 2 survivors, they met. Don Malarkey, an American, and Fritz Engelbert, a German. Neither men were particularly looking forward to the meeting. Here they were in their 80s. Both of them struggled for years, haunted by nightmares of battle, struggling with post-traumatic stress, depression, and feelings of severe guilt. But as they came together, they actually ended up forging the most unlikely of friendships. They had a relationship that built, which was based on honesty, acceptance, and a willingness to listen. They were able to forgive one another, and as a result, both men began to heal. The book is entitled Saving My Enemy. It's the story of the power of relationships. So here's the thing. As Christians, we too are called to connect in with one another because we too are in a battle. It's a battle against sin. It's a battle where we struggle with feelings of guilt, where we're overcome with darkness, doubt, and disbelief. And we need one another because we cannot do this on our own. We are designed to be in relationship with one another. We know that church, it's not about the building. It's not about the minister. It's not about the programs. Church is about the people of God getting alongside one another and worshipping the living God. And in order to do that fully, we need to plug into these relationships that charge us up and help direct us through the journey of faith. The early church were devoted to one another. Are we? Are we really engaging in this thing called fellowship? We said this, talked about this before I went away to America. Remember we said fellowship is not simply having a tea or a coffee after the service. Fellowship involves us rolling up our sleeves and getting involved in one another's lives. Praying for each other, sharing our hopes, our successes and our failures, our fears. And here's what we have, Jonathan and David, two men of God who connect in with one another. So what I want to do here is just very quickly set the scene. We're going to introduce three main characters and then we'll have our Bible reading. Here's the context very quickly in a few words. Our text today follows fast on the heels of David defeating Goliath. So here's our first character. We've got David. He's probably a teenager at this time. He is actually adored as a hero of his nation. He's shot to instant fame. Makes me think a little bit of Emma Raducanu winning that Grand Slam title. Prior to that date, most people would not have heard of her. And after that date, she became a household name with the pressures of the nation upon her shoulders. We see this time and time again. It often doesn't go well when fame and fortune are met by a teenager. I don't know if you saw the TV program a number of years ago entitled The Big Reunion. And what it did was it got pop groups from the early 90s back together. And in every single one of these groups, without fail, there was at least one member of the band who had suffered severely from depression and emotional anxieties and difficulties within their lives. And this is what David's going to find. Success and fame is not going to steer him into still waters, but instead it's going to propel him into river rapids. He's going to come into situations of conflict and danger. Why? Well, it seems predominantly because of our second character. A man by the name of Saul. He's the king of the nation. And here's a man with position, power, and possessions at his fingertips. But he's a man who is all about building his own kingdom. He's all about clutching at control. So we've got a very dangerous combination here. Power and insecurity. And here's what happens. Saul becomes a ticking time bomb. Now, here's the thing. The people have been saved by David. Everyone's cheering the new hero. But actually, just before we get our text today, if we just go back a page to verse 58, the end of chapter 17, here's what you're going to see. David being quizzed by the king, King Saul, who says, "Tell me about your father." Interesting. He doesn't say thank you. Well done, son. You did me a favour there. No, he wants to know about David's background. Yes, he's given his daughter away in marriage, but there's real signs here that he sees David as a pawn to be controlled. He's trying to weigh up, is this guy an asset or a liability? And then we've got Jonathan, the third character, Saul's son. He's the prince of the nation, the heir apparent. He's older than David. He's a different generation from David. He himself, a previous war hero, fighting and winning battle in 1 Samuel 14. It may well have been, actually, that he's a boyhood hero of David. Jonathan doesn't see David as a pawn to be controlled, but he sees him as a person to be honoured. And what he seeks to do is to mirror the relationship that he has with God himself. Today, I'm going to speak on the subject, connected. So our reading today is from 1 Samuel chapter 18, and we're just going to read 4 verses together. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. May God add a blessing to the reading of his word. So here's something that we would say here at Avendale and Drumclog Church. And you can't see me because it's just audio, but I'm pointing upward. This way relationship, now I'm pointing across the way, always impacts these ways relationships. Our upward relationship always impacts our horizontal relationships. When we're in a relationship where we're worshipping God and we're walking with God in the light, here's what happens. It enriches the relationships that we have with others. We start to operate in grace, mercy, and forgiveness. However, when our relationship with God is not in place and we're not operating from that place of light, here's what happens. Our relationships with others in our families and in our workplace and community suffers. Our upward relationships always impacts our outward relationships. So there are 3 points that we're going to look at that we see in the relationship between David and Jonathan. I want to say this from the outset. These are 3 general principles that we should be looking to apply across the board. However, when we look at the depth of what's going on between David and Jonathan, to be fully invested in this, we should be looking to have 2 or 3 other people within the church where we are really living this out in fullness. So here's the first point. The relationship between David and Jonathan is commitment bound. Again, we're reflecting the relationship that we have with God. What do we see from God? God is committed to his people. We see this starting in the Old Testament. His people, the Israelites, stiff-necked, rebellious, a moaning bunch of people. And yet, what do we see from God? He's the God of Emet and Hesed, steadfast loyalty and covenant faithfulness. He stands by them. Despite their moans and their complaints, he says, I am your God and you are my people. And then we see Jesus. Some of the final words, he promises to never leave nor forsake those who are his. We see absolute commitment from God towards his people. Now here's the thing, isn't it true? In life, sometimes we just don't like this word commitment. Perhaps you can think back to when you were younger, or you see it in a member of your own family. You've been called to get married or to get engaged, but you think, no, I don't want commitment. Can we just put it off a bit longer? I need to be more financially stable. And then eventually you end up getting married, and here's the next one. Well, it's time to have children. No, we have to wait a bit more. And again, it's another commitment that we're trying to avoid or put off. And then perhaps we come to a stage in life where we say, listen, I've got my job and my kids. I'm fully committed. Well, what we see here is there is commitment in the relationship between David and Jonathan, and it's got this basis and the depth. So here's the basis of the commitment. Verse 1, their souls were knitted together. And I think that picture's very powerful. This idea of being knitted together. We're not going to separate. And what it means is this, I'm going to stand by you even when you do things that annoy me. I'm going to stand by you. I'm here even when you slip up and make a mistake. And what it does is it provides a solid basis for relationships to flourish. It means I can be who I am. I don't need to keep looking over my back because I know we're in a committed relationship with one another. And this is so powerful when it comes to church stuff. Because there will be times when within the church you will come across others who you disagree with, who you come into conflict with. And we don't want to operate in an office culture which says, so-and-so lost it at that meeting. Let's gang up against them and discredit them. No, we're the church. And here's what we should do is we put our arm around that person. We say, I know you got carried away. You got upset last night, but that's okay because we are in this together. I stand by you through thick and thin. Well, as well as the basis of relationship, we also see that there's a depth. Verse 3, they made a covenant. Do you see the challenge here? That they're not saying, listen, we'll meet up now and again and we'll catch up and we'll chat a bit about the football and a little bit about our lives. No, what they're saying here is we're committing into one another. We're going to talk about faith. We're going to pray together. We're going to get alongside one another and be honest and open. We're not going to hide stuff. We're going to share our failures and we're going to carry one another's burdens. Church should be a greenhouse for relationships of commitment which allow one another to flourish. We pray, we share, and we stand by one another. Secondly, as well as it being commitment bound, we see that their relationship is love-centered. And again, an absolute reflection of our relationship with God. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only begotten Son. We love him for he first loved us. That whole idea it's the key ingredient, isn't it? When we were away in America, it was nice to have the opportunity to have different types of ingredients. One of the things we noticed, their mince is so much richer than what we would get in this part of the world where it's a bit watery in comparison. I was going to say you need that mince to make the burger, but of course there's all different types of burgers, so I need to be more specific. We need the mince to make the beef burger. If you don't have the mince, you can't make the beef burger. It's the key ingredient. Well, love is the key ingredient for the Christian. It's the kit that we wear. It's the badge that we adorn. It's got to be seen within us. It's what we're about. Because God loved us, and that is the flow that it would then flow out of us. And so often in church we can get caught up in the busyness and in our own little programs and areas that we forget that we are called to love first. So this is the point where I step into your living room, I put my feet up, and I look you in the eye and I ask you the question, have you personally experienced the love of God? Not that we know God is love and he loves people out there and he loves the world, but do you personally know that love? Now, perhaps you might say, well, Calum, I don't feel that love, and that's fine, because there will be times where we do not feel it. And our faith is not based and grounded upon emotion, although it will involve that from time to time. But our faith is grounded in the facts of Jesus who died on the cross. That when we don't feel that love, here's the good news, we can look to the cross and see that love poured out in full for you personally and individually. Love should be at the centre. And that's how it is for David and Jonathan. Verse 1, Jonathan loved David as his own soul. The relationship is up front, central love. Now, I think that this is actually quite remarkable when we break it down. I think sometimes we think David and Jonathan, sort of two lads in the same rugby team, they get on very well. No. David is another generation. And we know how different generations can bamboozle us because they operate in different ways. So the younger generation of today, my son's a teenager, 18 years old, Drives me crazy at times. What are you doing today? Don't know. You don't have any plans? No. And then the next minute, he's out the door. Oh, we've got plans now. They organise things at the last minute on their phone in a way that my generation would never do. We operate differently. So here's David and Jonathan. They're from different generation. As well as that, they're from completely different backgrounds. And do you know what? When you're from a different background from another person, it's so easy to label them. So here's how it could have played out here. Jonathan could have looked at David and labelled him as a shepherd boy pleb. Equally, David could have looked at Jonathan and labelled him as an entitled upper-class snob. But they didn't. Despite their differences, they choose not to label, but they choose love. And this is the amazing thing about church. We can come together from different generations, different backgrounds. On one level, we've got nothing in common, but on the other hand, because of the richness of faith that we've been given through Jesus Christ, we recognise that the ground beneath the cross is flat. We stand shoulder to shoulder as a brother and sister in the Lord, and it changes everything. Suddenly, we've got everything in common. So it's the challenge to let love flow. We've got a relationship that's bound up in commitment, that has love at the centre. And then thirdly and finally, it is grace-filled. And we see this in verse 4. What is grace? Well, we've said it time and time again, haven't we? What is grace? Grace is getting that which you do not deserve. We put God in the rear view mirror of our life, but he keeps us forefront and central. Religion says, perform. Grace says, I perform for you. And we see this in the relationship between David and Jonathan. Jonathan positions himself for grace. Verse 4, Jonathan gives his armour, sword, bow, belt. He doesn't need to do that. Now, from a material point of view, this is costly. This is of great value. But there's something more important going on here. Jonathan is publicly endorsing David. He's saying before the army and before all the people, this is the next rightful king. Spotlight on him, not me. I mean, this is remarkable. Jonathan's the second in the kingdom. Left to kind of a flesh and blood response, here's what we would often feel, is we would feel jealous and angry of this nobody coming in and stealing your position. But he doesn't operate in a flesh and blood capacity. What he does is he takes his relationship that he has with God and he applies it to his relationship with David. He reflects what God does in his life and he says, I'm positioning myself for grace. When we were in America, we did get the opportunity to go to the Yankee Stadium to see soccer, see how Americanized I am. And that was a lot of fun. We didn't see baseball, but on the way back, Heather, the session clerk of First Presbyterian Mahopac Church, gave us a lift to the airport, and I chatted a little bit to her about baseball, as she's a massive Yankees fan. And in the game of baseball, here's what can sometimes happen. The batter goes in to take his position. He receives a ball coming flying at him. And here's what he does, is he just seeks to tap it. It's called a bunt. And here's what happens inevitably as you bunt the ball, make your way towards first base. It's such a pathetic hit that the fielder will pick it up, throw it to first base, and you will be scored out. So why do you bunt? Well, you bunt because there are people on the other bases who can then get into scoring positions. You sacrifice yourself for the benefit of the team. And this is exactly what Jonathan is doing for the benefit of David. Why does he do this? Because he knows that this is God's relationship to him. And we see this more clearly than David or Jonathan could ever have seen it, because we get to see this gospel of grace lived out through Jesus. The one who was clothed in majesty in heaven, gave up his place and becomes nothing, was stripped of everything, was mocked, shamed, and beaten for you. And he does this so that nobodies like you and me could become somebodies in the eyes of God. That the stranger, the alien, the one who was far off can be brought in close and be called a son or daughter of the living God. The ones who place their trust in him have their shame covered by the robes of righteousness, which comes through the sacrifice of Jesus. Jesus is the one who is demonstrated to you and offers you, if you do not already know it, a relationship that is bound in commitment. He suffered. That is love-centered. He was driven by love and is grace-filled. He didn't have to take the cross, but he chose to make the ultimate bunt by dying in your place for your sins. Final thoughts. And I'll leave you with this. Are you more of a Saul or a Jonathan? And perhaps in different circumstances we operate in different ways, but it's worth considering. Saul takes, Jonathan gives. Saul has a spirit of jealousy and control and envy, but Jonathan acts differently. He operates in openness, love and gratitude. Saul treats David as a pawn to be controlled. Jonathan sees David as a person to be honoured. One other thought. God provides people for his people. For Naomi, he gives Ruth. For Paul, he gives Barnabas. For David, he gives Jonathan. God has provided people for you. They're around you today. And I think there's a challenge here. Don't miss those people. Don't take them for granted. But seek to be in a meaningful relationship that is bound in commitment, that is grace-filled and is centered in love.